The restaurant was small, cozy, and quiet, with warm lights that made the wooden tables glow in soft hues. The smell of fresh bread and simmering sauces floated through the air, mixing with the faint scent of coffee from the corner machine. It was the kind of place that felt familiar, where people could forget the rush of the outside world for a while. The walls were lined with simple paintings, and the gentle hum of conversation added to the calm, inviting atmosphere. A young waitress moved through the restaurant with practiced ease. She balanced plates in her hands, refilled glasses, and smiled at regular customers who nodded at her in recognition. She loved working here, not because it was glamorous or high-paying, but because of the small connections she could make with people every day. She had learned that even a brief moment of kindness could change someone's day, and sometimes even more. That evening, a man entered the restaurant who immediately caught her attention. He was dressed in an expensive suit, one that seemed out of place in the modest restaurant. His shoes were polished and his watch glinted under the warm lights. He walked with a careful, measured step, and yet, there was something about the way he held himself that seemed heavy. His shoulders were slightly slumped, and his eyes didn't scan the room with curiosity or interest like most first-time visitors. Instead, they seemed distant, as if he carried a weight that no one else could see. He chose a table in a quiet corner, away from other diners. The waitress noticed his hesitation before he sat down, the way he touched the back of the chair as if seeking some stability, and then finally, he settled in, placing his hands neatly on the table. She approached him with a polite smile, her notepad ready. "Good evening. Can I get you something to drink while you look at the menu?" she asked softly. He glanced up, his eyes momentarily meeting hers, and for a fraction of a second, they betrayed a flicker of surprise. Perhaps he hadn't expected someone to speak to him so kindly. He nodded slightly and said, "Water, please." She smiled and walked away to get his drink, noticing the subtle tremor in his hand as he reached for the menu. It wasn't something obvious, but she had worked long enough in the restaurant to see the small signs when someone was tense or uncomfortable. She returned with a glass of water, setting it gently on the table. "Here you go. Take your time with the menu," she said, and then stepped back slightly, giving him space while keeping her eyes attentive in case he needed anything. As he looked through the options, he didn't seem hungry, at least not in the usual way. His movements were mechanical, his expression distant. She walked past his table a few times, serving other customers, but she couldn't help noticing him. There was something about his presence that tugged at her instincts, a quiet loneliness, a weight carried behind a polished exterior. She kept herself busy, but her mind returned to him often. After a few minutes, he finally made a choice. He asked for something simple, something classic. The waitress noted it carefully and left to place the order. She found herself thinking about the small things she could do to make him feel more comfortable, whether it was a quiet word or just letting him sit without intrusion. She had learned that sometimes people who seemed strong on the outside were struggling on the inside, and a gentle approach was always better than a rushed one. As she moved through the restaurant, she observed the other diners. Families laughed quietly, friends chatted over their meals, and couples leaned close to each other in conversation. The contrast between their light-hearted energy and the man in the corner was stark. He remained still, occasionally glancing at the menu or the restaurant around him, but never engaging. His eyes held a shadow, a depth that spoke of challenges or pressures she could only imagine. She returned with his meal, placing it carefully in front of him. "Here you go. I hope you enjoy it," she said softly. He looked up at her again, and this time, there was a faint acknowledgement, almost like a thank you, though no words were spoken. As she moved on to serve other tables, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story. She had learned over time that wealth and status didn't protect someone from pain or loneliness. Often those who seemed to have everything carried hidden burdens that no one else could see. This man, sitting quietly with his hands folded on the table, seemed to carry that kind of weight. She wondered what had brought him here, what had driven him to this quiet corner of a small, unassuming restaurant instead of somewhere grand or luxurious. While serving another table, she noticed him shift slightly in his seat. A subtle sigh escaped him, barely audible but enough to catch her attention. She felt a pull of empathy and knew she wanted to reach out in a small, gentle way. She moved with careful attention, giving him space, yet remaining nearby enough that he might feel a human presence without pressure. As minutes passed, the restaurant began to fill up slightly. though it never lost its cozy atmosphere. She continued to observe him discreetly. The way he picked at his food, the occasional pause, the distant look in his eyes, it all spoke of someone wrestling with something deep inside. She had served many people over the years, and she had seen that expression before. A mix of solitude, reflection, and a longing for something that couldn't be bought or commanded. It was in that quiet moment, when she paused at a nearby table and glanced back, that she noticed a small tremble in his hand as he reached for his glass of water. The movement was so slight that most people would miss it, but she didn't. Her heart ached slightly for him, not pity, but a real sense of understanding. She realized that sometimes the smallest gestures, a simple smile, a gentle word, or just being present, could make a difference in a person's day or even their life. She continued her rounds, serving food, refilling drinks, and attending to small requests. Each time she walked past his table, she offered a soft nod or a quiet smile. Each time he returned it faintly at first, almost imperceptibly, but enough for her to notice. She sensed a gradual shift, a slow opening that didn't need words yet. The human connection was forming, quietly, gently. As the evening progressed, the restaurant lights dimmed slightly to create a more intimate ambiance. The low hum of conversation persisted, a soothing backdrop to the soft clinking of cutlery and glasses. She paused near his table once more, and he looked up, finally meeting her eyes with something more than acknowledgement. There was curiosity, a flicker of life, as if he were stepping out of the isolation he had carried. In that moment, she knew that the evening had already started to change for him. The presence of someone who genuinely cared, someone who noticed the small hidden parts of his struggle, had begun to make a difference. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and she recognized it. She continued her work, serving the other customers, but always with a quiet awareness of him in the corner. She understood that she couldn't solve all his problems, couldn't take away the burdens he carried, but she also knew that empathy, patience, and kindness could create a small sanctuary, even for a short while, where someone could feel seen, human, and less alone. As the night drew on, she carried the hope that perhaps by the time he left, the man in the corner might feel a little lighter, a little more human, and a little more willing to trust that there were people who could see beyond the suit, beyond the wealth, and into the heart of the person sitting quietly, trying to hold it all together. She didn't yet know how, but she felt that something meaningful was about to unfold, something small and powerful that could change the course of his evening, and perhaps more. The soft glow of the lights, the aroma of food, the quiet rhythm of the restaurant, it all created a space where anything was possible, even for someone who had everything in the world and yet carried an invisible weight. And in the midst of this ordinary, cozy restaurant, two people, one noticing, one struggling, were on the verge of a connection that might just make the world feel a little kinder, a little warmer, and a little more human. The man in the corner continued eating quietly, but there was a change, subtle yet noticeable. The small flicker of acknowledgement he had shown earlier had grown into a slight relaxation in his posture. His shoulders were no longer as tense, and his movements were a little less mechanical. The waitress noticed, and her heart felt a quiet satisfaction, though she remained professional, continuing her rounds with gentle attentiveness. As she moved around the restaurant, she couldn't help but glance back at him. The way he looked at his food, the pauses in his movements, all hinted at a mind that was elsewhere, lost in thoughts he did not share. He had the appearance of someone used to control, someone who always had to project strength and composure. But beneath the surface there was vulnerability, and the waitress could sense it. She knew that sometimes people like him didn't need grand gestures or advice. They needed quiet understanding and the reassurance that someone could see them as they truly were. She refilled his water glass once, placing it gently on the table. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave a small nod of thanks. There was no conversation yet, only silent recognition. Still, in the small gestures there was a growing connection. The waitress understood that these small moments mattered more than words could. They were building trust in the quietest, gentlest way. The restaurant was filling up now. Evening diners had arrived, some in groups, some alone, each bringing their own stories, their own energy. The waitress moved with skill, juggling plates and glasses, always keeping an eye on the man in the corner. She noticed he had started to glance around more, not just at the menu or his food, but at the people in the restaurant, the way they interacted. There was curiosity now mingled with the distance he carried. At one point, she passed his table while carrying a tray of dishes and offered a soft, encouraging smile. He looked up, and there was a faint hint of a smile on his face in return, almost shy, almost embarrassed. The waitress knew that this was progress. For someone who was not used to showing emotion or vulnerability, even the smallest acknowledgement was a big step. She felt a quiet warmth, knowing that her presence and gentle attention were helping him feel less alone. While taking another order, she noticed him place his fork down and lean back slightly, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. She paused nearby, giving him space but ready to respond if he needed. Her instincts told her that he was battling something internal, something he wasn't ready to voice yet. She had learned to be patient in these moments, to allow someone to reveal themselves at their own pace. The kitchen sent out an appetizer to the man, something light and simple, and she placed it before him with care. "Here you go." "This is on the house," she said softly. He looked at her in surprise, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Then after a pause, he nodded and murmured a quiet thank you. The waitress didn't push for more interaction, letting the gesture speak for itself. Sometimes actions were more powerful than words, and she had learned that well. As he began eating, she continued her work but kept her attention on him in the background. She noticed small details. The way his hand slightly trembled when reaching for his drink, the faint tension in his jaw, the occasional sigh he tried to suppress. These signs told her that his struggles were not visible to others but very real to him. She felt a surge of empathy, understanding that despite the wealth and the carefully crafted exterior, he was just a person trying to navigate pain and pressure. He paused mid-bite, looking down at his plate, and for a moment, his eyes seemed to fill with moisture. The waitress caught it, a single glimmer of vulnerability, a tear he quickly brushed away with his napkin. She felt a pang in her heart but didn't rush over or make a fuss. Instead, she approached his table calmly, keeping her voice low and gentle. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, not pressing, just offering a chance for him to respond if he wished. He looked up, startled by the question, unsure how to react. He didn't speak immediately, only swallowed, his throat tight. Then he shook his head slightly as if to say he was fine, though his eyes betrayed him. The waitress nodded, understanding that this was enough for now. She offered a reassuring smile and stepped back, leaving him space while remaining nearby. Sometimes the mere presence of someone who cared quietly could be more comforting than any words. As the evening went on, the restaurant's ambiance created a safe cocoon. The gentle music, the soft lighting, and the rhythm of quiet conversation wrapped around him like a comforting blanket. The waitress continued to observe him, noting how he gradually relaxed, how his shoulders loosened, how the tension in his movements eased. She realized that even small gestures, a smile, a nod, a soft word, were starting to chip away at the walls he had built around himself. He began to eat more steadily, focusing on the flavors, the textures, perhaps finding a temporary reprieve in the simplicity of a meal. The waitress noticed that he occasionally glanced up at her, as if seeking reassurance, though he quickly looked away when he felt caught. She met his gaze gently, offering warmth without intrusion. In these moments, trust was being built silently, delicately, and she knew that the real breakthrough would come when he felt safe enough to show more of himself. She moved past his table to attend to another customer, but kept glancing back. She could see the tiny changes, the subtle shifts in his demeanor. Each gesture, each glance, each hesitant smile was a sign that he was slowly opening up. It was a reminder that human connection often started in the smallest, quietest ways. That genuine care and attention could pierce through layers of armor and reach the heart. The waitress began to feel a sense of purpose in the evening. It wasn't about serving food or drinks anymore. It was about witnessing someone struggle and offering gentle support without demanding anything in return. She realized that sometimes people didn't need answers or solutions, only recognition, understanding, and the assurance that they were not invisible. After a while, he put down his fork and rested his chin in his hand, staring thoughtfully at the table. The waitress approached once more, careful not to intrude, and asked softly, "Is there anything else I can get for you?" He shook his head slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was real. It was the first sign that he was beginning to feel a little more comfortable, a little more human, and a little less burdened by the weight he had carried alone. The waitress understood the significance of that small gesture and felt a quiet satisfaction. As the night progressed, the restaurant began to empty slowly. The remaining diners were couples and small groups, and the atmosphere became even quieter, more intimate. The man in the corner finished his meal, leaving only a few bites on his plate. He seemed contemplative, not in a hurry to leave, as if the restaurant had become a temporary refuge from the outside world. The waitress watched him discreetly, noting the small ways he had changed over the course of the evening. His posture was a little straighter, his eyes a little brighter, and the faint smile that had appeared was still there, lingering in a way that suggested hope. She knew that the evening was far from over in terms of what it might bring, but she also understood that progress, no matter how small, was meaningful. She cleared the table nearby and glanced back again, seeing him sit quietly, taking in the atmosphere, the sounds, and perhaps the comfort of someone who had noticed him. There was a sense of calm settling over him, a gentle easing of tension that came not from wealth, influence, or status, but from human connection. The waitress felt a quiet pride in having been a part of that subtle transformation. As she prepared the final checks for the last tables, she moved past his corner once more. He looked up, and this time the smile was more genuine, more confident. He nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude and recognition. The waitress returned the gesture, knowing that it was enough for now, that the small steps taken over the evening had laid the groundwork for something deeper. The quiet rhythm of the restaurant, the warm glow of the lights, and the soft murmur of conversation created a space where healing, even if temporary, could happen. The waitress continued her work, mindful of the fragile progress, aware that the evening had been about more than just a meal. It had been about connection, empathy, and the unspoken understanding that sometimes being seen was the first step toward feeling truly alive again. As the night drew on and the last diners left, the man in the corner remained for a few more moments, gathering his thoughts, savoring the quiet sanctuary. The waitress moved nearby, ready to assist if needed, but allowing him to experience the peace that had begun to touch him. In that small, cozy restaurant, amidst the ordinary routines of food and service, something extraordinary had begun, the gentle, human connection that had the power to bring a sense of relief, a touch of hope, and the first faint glimmer of a smile from someone who had carried his struggles alone for too long. The restaurant had settled into a quiet rhythm, the soft music playing in the background and the gentle murmur of conversation filling the warm space. The young man in the corner remained at his table, finishing his meal slowly. There was a change in him now, subtle but undeniable. The tension that had been visible earlier was easing, and his eyes held a softer light. The waitress, moving through the restaurant with practiced ease, noticed every small shift in his demeanor. She understood that something was beginning to happen, something that could change the tone of the evening entirely. She approached his table, not with urgency, not with words that demanded attention, but with the quiet presence she had been offering all evening. She set down a small dish of dessert, something simple, something comforting. "I thought you might enjoy this," she said softly. He looked up, startled at first, then gave a faint smile, a smile that was more genuine than the quick nods or slight acknowledgments he had shown before. It was the first real sign that he was opening up, even if only a little. She waited a moment before speaking again, her voice low and gentle. "Sometimes it helps to just take a deep breath and let things be for a while. You don't have to carry everything alone." The words were simple, quiet, almost a whisper, but they carried sincerity and understanding. She could see the effect immediately. His hand, which had been resting tensely on the table, relaxed slightly. His shoulders, still holding some weight, dropped just a fraction. He looked at her, surprised. The words had pierced the wall he had built around himself, the carefully constructed barrier that kept others from seeing the strain he carried. He wasn't used to this. Most people either ignored him or treated him according to his status. But here, in this small restaurant with a waitress who had nothing to gain from being kind, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, genuine care. He swallowed, trying to find words, but none came immediately. His eyes met hers again, and for the first time that evening, there was a spark of recognition, not of who he was in the world, but of who he was in that moment, just a person, human, fragile, and in need of understanding. The waitress sensed his hesitation, his uncertainty, and she did not push. She knew better than to demand a response. Instead, she offered a small nod. a quiet assurance that she was there, patient and attentive, ready to listen when he was ready. The restaurant's other patrons were absorbed in their own conversations, oblivious to the subtle transformation taking place at the corner table. The young man, who had arrived tense and withdrawn, was now allowing himself to be present in the moment. He took a small bite of dessert, savoring the taste, and for a moment the worries that had seemed to weigh so heavily on him appeared to lift, if only slightly. The act of eating, of enjoying something simple without pretense, was a small but significant step. The waitress continued her rounds, keeping an eye on him while attending to other customers. She noticed that he occasionally glanced at her as if seeking reassurance. Each time she returned the gesture with a calm, encouraging smile. These silent exchanges were building trust, a bridge between two people who did not yet know how much they could mean to each other. The young man was beginning to understand that he could be vulnerable here without fear of judgment. He put his fork down again, leaning back in his chair, staring thoughtfully at the ceiling. There was a long pause, a quiet moment in which he seemed to wrestle with his thoughts. The waitress approached gently, not speaking at first, allowing him to gather his emotions. She could sense the weight pressing on him, the loneliness, the expectations, and perhaps even the fear of showing weakness. But she also sensed the beginnings of something else, a willingness to let someone in, to allow a connection that was human, honest, and real. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed sometimes," she whispered, just enough for him to hear without feeling exposed. "You don't have to pretend that everything is fine if it isn't. You can just be yourself for a little while." The words were simple, almost ordinary, but they carried a depth of empathy that struck him deeply. He looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, and for the first time that evening, he allowed himself to acknowledge the emotion he had been holding back. He shifted in his seat, a small tremor passing through him, and the waitress remained nearby, her presence steady and reassuring. She did not speak again, letting the silence do the work, letting the understanding between them grow without the need for more words. The restaurant, with its warm lights and gentle sounds, became a sanctuary, a safe space where he could feel human again. Slowly, he began to speak, his voice low and hesitant at first. He spoke of pressures he faced, of expectations that weighed heavily, of moments when he felt invisible despite the wealth and status he carried. Each word was chosen carefully, revealing glimpses of vulnerability that he had hidden from the world. The waitress listened attentively, nodding occasionally, offering small gestures of understanding. She did not interrupt, did not judge, did not try to offer solutions. She simply held space for him to be heard. As he spoke, he felt a strange sense of relief. The act of sharing, of being seen without pretense, was almost foreign to him, but it was powerful. The waitress's quiet encouragement, the small gestures of care, had created a bridge that allowed him to step onto it, even if just a little. He realized that vulnerability was not weakness but a form of strength, and that being seen as he truly was could bring comfort he had never expected. The minutes passed in quiet conversation and occasional pauses, each filled with unspoken understanding. The young man began to smile, tentatively at first, then more genuinely. The smile was a small, fragile thing, but it was real. The waitress noticed, her heart lifting, knowing that this was the moment she had hoped for, the moment when a human connection, gentle and sincere, began to break through the armor he had worn for so long. She continued to offer small gestures of kindness, refilling his water, checking if he needed anything, offering a quiet presence that reassured him without intruding. Each action, each word, each glance built on the last, creating a tapestry of trust and empathy that wrapped around him. He began to feel lighter, the tension easing, the loneliness softening, the walls he had built beginning to crumble. The restaurant, once just a place for a meal, had become a haven, a space where the young man could simply be himself, unburdened by expectation, unshackled by pretense. The waitress had created this space not through grand gestures but through patience, attentiveness, and genuine care. It was a reminder that human connection, even in its simplest form, could transform a moment, a day, or even a life. As the evening continued, the young man leaned back in his chair, letting out a quiet sigh of relief. He no longer felt the urgent need to maintain a composed facade. The presence of someone who cared, who had noticed him beyond the surface, had allowed him to relax, to breathe, to feel human again. The waitress, moving gracefully through the restaurant, observed this transformation with quiet satisfaction, knowing that the evening's events, though simple in their unfolding, had carried profound meaning. The young man looked at her once more, his eyes brightening, the smile on his face now steady and genuine. There was a silent understanding between them, a recognition of the power of small kind gestures and the importance of being seen without judgment. He realized that the world could be harsh, that expectations could be suffocating, but moments like this, moments of quiet connection, could remind him of the humanity that existed even amidst pressure and solitude. The restaurant continued to hum with life around them, but for the young man and the waitress, a different rhythm had taken hold. It was a rhythm of empathy, of shared understanding, of the unspoken promise that even in the most ordinary places, extraordinary human connections could occur. The young man's smile, now firm and genuine, was the proof of that connection, a testament to the subtle power of kindness, patience, and presence. As the night progressed, the young man's demeanor continued to lighten. He engaged more with the environment, noticing the warmth of the lights, the aroma of the food, and the subtle details that had gone unnoticed before. The waitress observed this quietly, understanding that her role had shifted from mere service to something far more meaningful. She had become a witness to a transformation, a facilitator of a moment where a person could feel truly seen and heard. The evening drew toward its close, and the young man prepared to leave, but not before taking a moment to acknowledge the woman who had made such a difference in his evening. He gave her a nod, a genuine smile, and a quiet expression of gratitude that spoke volumes. The waitress returned the gesture, her own heart warmed by the knowledge that even small acts of empathy and care could have profound effects. As he walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, there was a sense of lightness in his steps, a shift in perspective that had begun with a whisper, a smile, and the simple presence of someone who had chosen to care. The waitress watched him go, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing that a small act of kindness had helped bridge a gap between isolation and connection, loneliness and understanding. In that ordinary restaurant, amidst the routine of service and the comfort of food, something extraordinary had occurred, the beginning of a human connection that would linger long after the evening had ended. The evening had deepened, and the restaurant was now mostly quiet. The remaining customers spoke in soft tones, savoring the calm and cozy atmosphere. The young man remained at his corner table, though now he was more relaxed, less tense than when he had first arrived. There was a new softness in his expression, a lightness in the way he moved. The waitress continued to watch him from a distance, feeling a quiet satisfaction in the subtle change she had witnessed over the course of the evening. She approached his table once more, not with a sense of duty but with genuine care. She placed a small cup of tea in front of him, the steam curling upward, carrying warmth and comfort. "I thought you might like this," she said softly. He looked up, a gentle smile forming on his lips, and accepted it. There was something in the simplicity of the gesture that seemed to touch him more than words ever could. He lifted the cup, inhaling the aroma, and took a slow, thoughtful sip. The warmth spread through him, not just physically, but in a deeper emotional way. It reminded him that there were small comforts in life, moments of human kindness that could make even a heavy heart feel lighter. The waitress noticed the way he held the cup, the slight tremor in his hand that he was now trying to steady. She didn't comment or make a fuss. She simply sat nearby for a moment, letting him have the space to enjoy the tea and the quiet. In that shared silence, a bond began to form, unspoken but powerful. It was a bond rooted in empathy, patience, and the simple act of being seen. He looked around the restaurant, noticing details he hadn't before. The soft glow of the lights, the gentle hum of conversation, the comforting aroma of food and tea. For the first time that evening, he felt present in the space, rather than lost in his own thoughts. He realized how much he had missed moments like this, moments where he could simply exist without the constant weight of expectations pressing down on him. The waitress continued her rounds, attending to other tables but always keeping an eye on him. She could sense that he wanted to speak but wasn't quite ready. She had learned to recognize these moments, to give space while remaining a gentle presence. It was in these pauses, these quiet interludes, that people often found the courage to open up. Finally, after a few minutes of silence, he spoke, his voice low and hesitant. He shared fragments of his life, small pieces of the pressure he faced, the loneliness that often accompanied his position, and the moments of doubt that crept in despite his outward confidence. Each word was carefully chosen, each pause filled with thought and emotion. The waitress listened intently, offering a quiet nod or a reassuring smile, letting him know that he was being heard without judgment. He spoke of the challenges of living under constant scrutiny, the expectations of family and society, and the isolation that came with having so much but feeling disconnected from the world. His words were raw, honest, and for the first time, he allowed himself to be vulnerable in front of someone who didn't know him beyond this evening. The act of sharing, of letting another person see the struggles he had hidden, was both terrifying and liberating. The waitress responded not with advice or solutions, but with gentle understanding. She acknowledged his feelings, mirrored his emotions with empathy, and offered quiet encouragement. Her presence was steady, a calm anchor in the storm of his thoughts. She understood that her role wasn't to fix his problems, but to provide a space where he could feel human, understood, and supported. As he spoke, the young man's posture relaxed further. He leaned back in his chair, his shoulders no longer hunched with tension. His hands, once trembling and restless, now rested calmly on the table. There was a shift in his eyes, a light returning that had been absent when he first entered the restaurant. The waitress observed this transformation with quiet satisfaction, knowing that these small, patient moments were making a profound difference. He took a sip of his tea and allowed himself a small laugh, a soft sound that broke the heaviness of the evening. It was a laugh that came from relief, from the recognition that someone cared enough to listen without judgment. The waitress smiled in return, her heart warmed by the sound, understanding the significance of this simple human exchange. The conversation continued in a gentle rhythm, alternating between words and silence. He shared memories, fears, and fleeting moments of hope. The waitress responded with attentive listening, offering validation and quiet reassurance. The young man felt a growing sense of trust, a realization that he could be himself without pretense, that his emotions were valid, and that he didn't have to face his burdens alone. He paused for a moment, looking out the window at the street beyond, the soft glow of the city lights reflecting in his eyes. He took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift, even if just slightly. The waitress remained nearby, respecting his need for space while staying present, a steady reminder that he was not invisible. As the evening wore on, the young man's vulnerability transformed into something stronger. He smiled more openly, spoke with more confidence, and even joked lightly, a sound that felt both foreign and freeing to him. The waitress noticed the change and responded with encouragement, affirming his progress without making it feel forced or artificial. The connection between them had grown, not through grand gestures, but through quiet attention, empathy, and shared humanity. He reflected on the evening, realizing how rare and precious these moments were. In a world that often judged him for his wealth and status, here was someone who saw him as a person, not a title or a privilege. The experience was humbling, comforting, and transformative. He understood that human connection, even in its simplest forms, had the power to heal and bring light to the darkest corners of one's heart. The waitress continued her work, but she was acutely aware of the impact of her presence. She didn't need recognition or thanks. The transformation she witnessed was enough. The young man had begun to open up, to trust, and to feel seen in a way he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. The restaurant, once just a place to eat, had become a sanctuary, a space where empathy and care had created a meaningful connection. As the night drew closer to its end, the young man finished his tea and looked at the waitress with genuine gratitude. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the quiet, profound impact she had had on his evening. She returned the gesture, understanding that this moment was significant, not because of grand events, but because of the human connection that had blossomed in the warmth of a small, ordinary restaurant. He rose from his seat, feeling lighter, more present, and more connected than when he had arrived. The waitress watched him gather his things, sensing that the evening had marked a turning point. The small acts of kindness, the quiet presence, and the simple gestures of empathy had worked together to create a space where he could be himself, free from the weight of expectations. As he walked toward the door, he glanced back once, offering a smile that conveyed more than words could express. The waitress met his gaze, returning the smile, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed. In that moment, both of them understood the power of empathy, the importance of being seen, and the profound impact of small, genuine acts of human kindness. The young man stepped outside into the cool night, carrying with him a sense of hope and warmth that had been absent earlier. The waitress returned to her duties, her heart full, knowing that she had been part of something meaningful. In the ordinary routine of serving food, she had witnessed the extraordinary, the transformation of a person who had arrived weighed down by life, and who now left carrying a spark of light, connection, and hope that could last long beyond the walls of the restaurant. The restaurant was quiet now, with only a few tables still occupied. The soft hum of conversation, the clinking of cutlery, and the warm glow of the lights created a calm, intimate atmosphere. The young man remained at his table, though now he seemed different. He was no longer tense, no longer withdrawn. There was a lightness in his posture, a softness in his eyes, and a genuine warmth on his face. The waitress continued to observe him quietly, understanding that the evening had shifted from ordinary to something meaningful and profound. She approached his table, carrying a small tray with a cup of warm herbal tea, the steam rising in gentle curls. "I thought you might enjoy this before you leave," she said softly. He looked up at her, and for the first time his smile was steady and confident. It was not the tentative, fragile smile from earlier. It was real, heartfelt, and full of gratitude. He accepted the cup with a nod, inhaling the aroma deeply, savoring the warmth that spread through him. The waitress sat for a brief moment nearby, giving him space while remaining a steady presence. She knew that words were not always necessary, that sometimes just being there, silently supportive, could speak volumes. He took a slow sip, feeling the warmth seep into him not just physically but emotionally. The heaviness he had carried all evening seemed lighter, eased by the small gestures of kindness that had built a bridge between them. He set the cup down and looked out the window at the street beyond, the city lights reflecting softly in his eyes. He felt a sense of calm he had not known in a long time. The pressures of wealth, status, and expectation that had weighed so heavily on him seemed to loosen, if only slightly. He realized that in this small, ordinary restaurant, he had found something extraordinary: human connection, empathy, and the understanding that he did not have to carry everything alone. The waitress continued her rounds, attending to the remaining customers, but her attention frequently drifted back to him. She noticed the subtle ways he had changed over the evening, the relaxed posture, the gentle smile, the occasional thoughtful pause. Each small transformation told a story of progress, of trust slowly forming, and of the power of quiet, genuine care. He began to speak again, his voice soft but more confident than before. He shared small insights, reflections on his life, and fleeting moments of hope he had rarely allowed himself to feel. The waitress listened intently, her presence steady and unobtrusive, offering encouragement through gentle nods and attentive expressions. He realized that he could speak without fear of judgment, that his emotions were valid, and that he could be vulnerable without consequence. As he talked, he laughed softly, a sound that felt freeing and natural. It was a stark contrast to the tense silence he had brought into the restaurant hours earlier. The waitress smiled back, sharing in the quiet joy of the moment. It was a mutual recognition that something had shifted, that the human connection they had formed, however simple and small, was meaningful and transformative. The young man reflected on the evening, understanding the rarity and value of what had occurred. In a world where people often saw him as a title or a figure of wealth, here was someone who saw him as a person, unguarded and real. The experience was humbling and comforting, a reminder that human kindness could pierce even the heaviest armor. He realized that connection did not require grand gestures or material wealth. It could begin with something as simple as a smile, a kind word, or a quiet presence. The restaurant staff were finishing their work, and the soft ambiance made the space feel even more intimate. He took a moment to acknowledge the waitress with a sincere nod, conveying gratitude that words could not fully capture. She returned the gesture, her heart warmed by the acknowledgement, knowing that the evening's events had left a lasting impact on him. He slowly gathered his belongings, feeling a sense of lightness and hope that had been absent when he first arrived. The burdens he had carried, though not entirely gone, seemed manageable now, eased by the understanding and empathy he had received. He realized that human connection could transform a moment, a day, or even a perspective on life. and that it often began in the simplest of ways. As he prepared to leave, he glanced back once more, offering a smile that radiated genuine warmth. The waitress met his gaze and returned the smile, a silent understanding passing between them. It was a recognition of the power of empathy, the importance of being seen and the profound effect of small, kind gestures. The young man stepped outside into the cool night, the city lights reflecting softly around him. He felt lighter, more present, and more human. The warmth of the evening lingered within him, a reminder that even in moments of solitude and struggle, connection and kindness could be found. He walked with a quiet confidence, carrying the lessons of empathy, patience, and the importance of being seen in every step. Back in the restaurant, the waitress returned to her duties, her heart full. She knew that her small acts of kindness and genuine attention had made a difference. The evening had been ordinary in one sense, filled with routine tasks and meals served, but extraordinary in another. She had witnessed a transformation, a human connection that transcended wealth, status, and appearances. The young man had arrived burdened and withdrawn, and he left carrying a spark of hope, warmth, and recognition that could linger far beyond the walls of the restaurant. The lights dimmed further as the restaurant prepared to close. The quiet atmosphere, the lingering aroma of food, and the soft hum of conversation left a sense of peace in the space. The waitress paused for a moment, reflecting on the evening's events. She understood the subtle but profound impact of empathy, presence, and genuine human connection. It was a reminder that even the simplest gestures could change someone's day, their perspective, or their heart. She cleaned the last tables and prepared for the night's end, carrying with her the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had been part of something meaningful. The young man's smile, his laughter, and the light in his eyes would remain with her, a testament to the extraordinary power of ordinary moments. In the routine of serving meals and attending to customers, she had witnessed the remarkable, the transformation of a person, the emergence of hope, and the enduring value of empathy. As the door closed behind the last customers, the restaurant settled into stillness. The waitress stood for a moment, looking around the space that had hosted such a quiet human drama. She felt a sense of fulfillment, understanding that her work had been more than serving food. It had been about creating a space where someone could feel seen, understood, and valued. The evening had shown that even small acts of kindness, gentle words, and patient attention could leave a lasting impact on another person's life. Outside, the young man disappeared into the night, carrying with him the warmth, connection, and hope that had been offered in the simple, ordinary setting of the restaurant. The waitress returned to her routine, her heart lighter, knowing that the human spirit could be touched and uplifted through quiet empathy, sincere attention, and the courage to offer kindness without expectation. The night had ended, but the impact of the evening, the transformation, and the shared humanity would linger long after, a reminder that even in the smallest moments, extraordinary things could happen.